At the beginning of the 20th century, most of the Yaqui people were captured and sold into slavery on plantations, where their labor was brutal and exhausting. However, harsh work was not the only goal in conquering and enslaving this people. Yaqui women were forced into marriages with Chinese men for reasons that were quite alarming and had little to do with cultural exchange or mutual respect. These circumstances are deeply troubling and evoke profound sympathy. The most remarkable aspect of Yaqui history is their steadfast and uncompromising resistance to colonial expansion. These Indians were the only Native American tribe to have never officially surrendered to Spanish colonists, the Mexican government, or even the American authorities. In the 16th century, the lands of the Yaqui stretched along the lower Yaqui River in what is now northern Chihuahua, Mexico. At that time, their population was about 30,000 people, dispersed across approximately 80 villages, covering an area about 60 miles long and 15 miles wide. They were a peaceful people living in harmony with nature, with the river serving as their primary source of life. Their dwellings were traditional handmade homes built from clay bricks, fired to achieve hardness and durability. This ancient and extraordinary culture developed based on hunting and gathering, utilizing natural resources carefully to sustain their food and household needs. Some Yaqui settlements were located at the river's mouth and engaged in fishing and collecting marine resources, while most of them lived in rural areas on land allocated for agriculture, where they grew beans, maize, and squash, crops cultivated on flood-prone land that flooded annually. Additionally, some groups lived in deserts and mountains, adapting to very different environmental conditions. Unlike northern peoples, the Yaqui almost never wore clothing. Men dressed only in simple Indian loincloths and sometimes in deerskin leggings. Women preferred narrow skirts made of animal fur, reaching the knees. This people was entirely self-sufficient, living in close harmony with nature, and successfully providing for all their needs. Everything proceeded smoothly until an unwelcome visitor arrived on their lands. In 1533, they first encountered a group of outsiders. The leader of this expedition was Captain Diego de Usman, an individual belonging to Spanish settlers living slightly south of the Yaqui territory. He was searching for new lands to expand his power and wealth. The Yaqui warriors were known for their cruelty and fighting spirit, as neighboring regions knew, but they rarely sought conflict and were inclined to defend themselves only when necessary. Part 2 of 7. Initially, some members of this group believed that the confrontation was simply an accident, a misunderstanding, or a minor clash. But it soon became clear that their visit marked the beginning of a new era of trials for this ancient and proud people. The language barrier had little significance during the events. A heated conversation could have quickly clarified the situation, but unfortunately, both sides were not prepared for such a primitive approach. As a result, within just a few minutes, a bloody battle broke out. The Spaniards were forced to retreat, yet even in this outcome, they managed to reach their objectives and claimed victory. During the clash, the Yaqui suddenly lost part of their land and, along with it, gained a new enemy. Thus began a long 40-year period of struggle to preserve their territory and culture, an era forever etched in the history of this people. This battle was perhaps the first serious conflict between the Yaqui and the Spanish conquerors, but it was by no means their last confrontation. The entire prolonged saga demonstrates that conflicts between them continued for many years. Although the Yaqui lacked firearms, guns, and cannons typical of their new European opponents, they excelled at wielding bows and arrows, and did so with such high skill that their combat abilities evoked respect and fear in the hearts of their enemies. In 1365, the Spanish conquistador Francisco de Ara finally attempted to establish a Spanish settlement on Yaqui territory. This mission was unsuccessful. He lost many of his men, and perhaps even his pride, as his main goal, to find silver and other precious metals, was often unattainable in these lands. January, February, March, April No matter how many failures Diarra experienced, he did not give up fighting. However, it should not be thought that the war ended with his retreat. Clashes did not cease. History remembers numerous small battles that continued over a long period. It was only in 1368 that, after many skirmishes, the Yaqui united with over 2,000 of their kin, mainly of the Mayo people, and achieved victory in two major battles against the Spaniards. These victories boosted their reputation and gave them confidence in their strength. Finally, in 1371, they signed a peace treaty, agreeing to relinquish part of their lands, but receiving in return a guarantee, a document signed personally by the King of Spain, affirming their right to hold the remaining part of their territory in the south of the state of Sonora. At that time, the Yaqui population was approximately between 100 and 200,000 people. In 1417, the Yaqui invited Jesuit missionaries to their lands, who for many years lived among them and taught them new knowledge. Part 3 of 7. The inhabitants of the region participated in this cooperation, which was mutually beneficial. On the one hand, they gained new knowledge, and on the other, they preserved their traditional customs and beliefs. Jesuit missionaries, while teaching the Yaqui about Christianity, simultaneously regarded their theology as part of the rich and complex worldview of the people. Thus, a unique syncretic religion emerged, a fusion of ancient Yaqui beliefs and Christian teachings. For over 120 years, this intricate spiritual system continued to develop, leaving a vivid mark on Yaqui cultural history. During a period of intense reforms and revival within indigenous religious movements, especially in the context of missionary activities and cultural changes, the Jesuits played a significant role. They not only provided spiritual enlightenment, but also introduced Yaqui lands to seeds, cattle, and horses, relying on their deep knowledge of the Sonora desert landscape. Traditionally, the Yaqui engaged in agriculture, cultivating the famous Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash, and also growing cotton. During those years, the Yaqui thrived. Their farming and crafts provided steady income and prosperity. Feeling strength and confidence, they allowed missionaries to expand their activities northward, toward lands that stretched further and further. By the early 1770s, as Spanish settlers and gold prospectors moved closer, the borders of the Yaqui were increasingly contested. The Spaniards began to diligently explore and seize their lands. At the same time, Spanish colonial authorities started to alter the complex political and social relationships, causing confusion and irritation among the Yaqui. In response to these injustices and the invading enemy in 1740, the Yaqui people, together with the neighboring Mayo people, rose in rebellion. It was brutal and bloody. Approximately 1,000 Spaniards and 5,000 indigenous people were killed as a result of this uprising. The confrontation left a deep mark in collective memory and became a source of mutual hatred and anxiety. After this event, the Jesuits, feeling endangered, hurriedly began to leave the lands, fearing repression and further uprisings. The departure of the missionaries meant the loss of the educational and spiritual guidance system, which significantly weakened the position of the Yaqui people. Unfortunately, by the 1770s, the Jesuits had completely left Mexico, and their place was taken by Franciscan monks, who never gained the trust of the Yaqui. As a result, after the Revolution of 1740, a formal but unstable and tense peace was established between the Spaniards and the indigenous peoples. Years passed, and everything changed drastically in 1818, when Spain suffered defeat in the prolonged 11-year war for Mexican independence. However, for the Yaqui people, this victory was more of a formality. They continued to see themselves as independent and self-governing. When the newly formed Mexican government demanded payment of taxes from them, the Yaqui outright refused, and the conflict flared up anew with renewed intensity. In 1925, the Yaqui people, led by a leader named Juan Bandera, launched a large-scale uprising. Their main goal was to unite neighboring peoples, Mayo, Oputa, and Pima, into an independent state, separate from Mexico. Energetic and resilient, these tribes fought tirelessly, and after numerous bloody clashes, successfully expelled the Mexicans from their territories. However, the uprising was short-lived. By 1933, the Yaqui and their leader were defeated, Juan Bandera captured and executed. This defeat only fueled new waves of resistance. The Yaqui people continued to oppose any form of control by the Mexican authorities. A series of new rebellions and uprisings persisted, and the fight to preserve their independence and traditional way of life continued through ongoing trials and confrontations. Thus, the history of the Yaqui reflects resilience, struggle, and an unwavering will to reject foreign orders in order to maintain their identity and cultural autonomy. During the period of armed conflict involving Mexican authorities, horrific acts of cruelty and brutal reprisals were carried out by the army. In 1918, during one mass act of violence, soldiers burned approximately 150 Yaqui people in a church, marking one of the most horrifying incidents of that time. This bloody atrocity continued throughout the rule of a Yaqui leader known as Kahimi, who was overthrown and executed in 1918, 87 years. After his death, Mexican authorities changed their policy towards the Yaqui, began confiscating their lands, and forcing hundreds of people out of their settled territories, compelling them to leave their homes. Many were forced to flee into mountain gorges, where they joined guerrilla groups and waged a guerrilla war against the Mexican armed forces. In 1876, dictator Porfirio Diaz entered the political landscape of the country, and the situation worsened even further. Not limited to land seizures, the Mexican government began brutal persecutions and abuses against the Yaqui people. Thousands were captured and sold into slavery on plantations growing sugarcane and tobacco. Military forces hunted the Yaqui almost like wild animals, especially when the reward for each of their heads was $100 per head of a fugitive guerrilla. Porfirio Diaz personally ordered the transportation of thousands of Yaqui, including women and children, to the port of San Blas, where they were forcibly made to walk over 200 miles to the city of San Marcos. This exhausting trek, coinciding with hot weather, lasted several weeks. Many women and small children did not survive, their bodies left along the roadside to be devoured by wild animals. Part 5 of 7. Those who managed to reach their destination were enslaved on plantations, where they spent every day working under the scorching sun, from dawn to dusk. They were given very little food, and if they failed to meet nearly impossible work quotas, they were cruelly beaten. At night, many were locked in cold concentration camps, enduring loneliness and harsh conditions. Most of the Yaqui sent to the plantations died there. Almost two-thirds perished in their first year of slavery. Yaqui women were forced to choose husbands among Chinese slaves. If a woman refused, a man was chosen for her. Those who resisted were subjected to severe beatings. This forced intermingling was part of a broader strategy by Mexican authorities, an attempt to completely eradicate the Yaqui people, to eliminate their unique culture and heritage. While these horrific events took place, Yaqui resistance continued. Some fighting took place for a time, after which some Yaquis fled to Arizona, where they carried out activities to earn money to buy firearms and ammunition needed to support guerrilla bands fighting against the Mexican government. The last major battle between the Mexican army and the Yaqui occurred in 1927 in the Cerro del Gallo mountain area. Unfortunately, the powerful artillery and aerial bombings by Mexican forces made it impossible for the Yaquis to win that encounter. In 1937, when General Lázaro Cárdenas, who had been hostile to the Yaqui and defeated them in 1917, became the country's leader, significant changes took place. He decided to reserve 500,000 hectares of traditional Yaqui lands, territory north of the Yaqui River, which they considered their ancestral homeland. As part of this policy, he also ordered the construction of a dam to provide irrigation and watering of Yaqui crops. Furthermore, he was provided with modern agricultural equipment and water pumps, marking a real breakthrough after centuries of fierce conflict. Thanks to these measures, the Yaqui were able to regain some independence from Mexican domination and finally begin to reap the rewards of their labor and lost time. In 1939, Their farms produce 3,500 tons of wheat, 500 tons of corn, and 750 tons of beans. While just a few years earlier, in 1935, they had produced only 250 tons of wheat and did not grow corn or beans, their revival was moving at full speed. Gradually, the Yaqui regained their lost opportunities, restored their farms, and revitalized their culture. The Sonoran Desert, where they lived, is considered the hottest desert in Mexico, which is why the river is a vital resource for the Yaqui. However, after decades of war and conflict, the Yaqui found themselves forced to fight for their water rights, as it became increasingly difficult to access their lands. Water is illegally diverted to other regions, while droughts and dams have led to the river drying up significantly, posing a serious threat not only to their livelihoods, but also to their very culture. In addition to the disappearance of essential water resources for drinking and irrigation, the lowering of water levels has caused a sharp decline in the number of plants and trees that are part of their natural heritage. As a result, the Yaqui are compelled not only to purchase water in plastic containers imported from other regions, but also to do so under strict regulations. Although they managed to reclaim some of their land, it was not easy. The lands were under new conditions, altered and damaged, which negatively affected their natural resources. Almost all traditional Yaqui villages have been destroyed and looted over many decades, and today, after many years, they live in a completely new world, as their ancestral settlements no longer exist. A decision was made to relocate them to reservations, some of which are located in Arizona, far from their native lands and traditional way of life. Their ancient adobe huts, made of adobe and symbolizing their traditional lifestyle, have been replaced by modern concrete buildings that conform to new conditions. The Yaqui are accustomed to wearing bright embroidered skirts, symbols of their culture and craftsmanship. But now many prefer more familiar jeans, aligned with modern fashion. As a result of these changes, the need to create their own goods and items has disappeared. Everything is now produced in factories of the modern world, which, in their belief, was meant to make their lives easier and more comfortable. Nevertheless, today, the Yaqui remain independent, not only in their relations with the Mexican government, but also as individuals, preserving their identity and uniqueness. Many continue to live in modern reservations in Arizona, maintaining a more traditional way of life, while others return to traditional living in Mexico, striving to preserve and restore as many of their historical customs, symbols, and cultural values as possible. They emphasize their independence, for which they have fought so hard and persistently for many generations. Today, there are 8 Yaqui villages in the state of Sonora, and although their way of life may differ from their traditional customs, these people still actively engage in crafts and arts that have been a vital part of their culture for centuries. The Yaqui are known for their resilience. Their struggle to preserve autonomy and cultural traditions occupies a special place in the history of this people. For a long time, they fought the most resolute, prolonged, and successful battle against the forced assimilation of their culture by Spanish, Catholic, and Mexican dominant systems. Moreover, the Yaqui are the only indigenous people of America who have never fully capitulated to Spanish colonial forces, Mexican authorities, or American invaders, defending their independence and sovereignty by all available means. This resilient spirit and unwavering commitment to preserving their traditions make them a unique people, a source of pride among the indigenous nations of both countries.